Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, Threadripper, we got benchmarks, 8th gen Intel CPUs are coming. How about a petabyte of storage or a $125 Android phone with killer specs from T-Mobile? All that and more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 427, recorded August 10th, 2017. Damn, that's fast. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Hardware, Twitch weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful information, news, and reviews of hardware. Desktop hardware, mobile hardware, handheld hardware, tablet hardware, Internet of Things, or Internet of Crap, as we often call them around here. My name is Patrick Norton, and I am joined, ladies and gentlemen, by Mr. Ryan Shrout of PC Per, who has been benchmarking like mad this week.
It's been kind of like it's dumb to say because people out there want more content, but it's been like a hellacious type of like summer, really. So yeah, we've got Threadripper up, and it's not a secret that RX Vega is coming next week. And we did Ryzen 3 the week before that, and we've had Skylake X before that. It's kind of been a nonstop, kind of like PC hardware release schedule. Yeah, which is good. You know, there's plenty of content, but it also means there's been a whole lot of Ryan sitting in his kitchen on his laptop writing until 2:30 in the morning before coming back into the office the next day type of thing. But hey, we're here. We're talking hardware. It's all good.
On one hand, I feel your pain. On the other hand, neither of us are packing boxes in the Amazon warehouse where they actually physically forbid you to speak during your shift. Because apparently that's bad for productivity.
Every once in a while, a day like that would be good, but not every day. Yeah. Yeah. Or not having to, I guess. I don't know. Whichever way you want to look at it.
It's a good theory. I don't think it works well with marriage, but it's a good theory, or parenting for that matter. AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1950X, 1920X review. The shortest, simplest version of this possible is that Intel still has an advantage in single core performance, but as soon as you go to multi-cores for $1,000, the 1950X opens up a 16-core, 32-thread can of whoop ass. This chip is huge. I got to hold one of these in my hand yesterday, and I was just kind of staring at it like, you know, it feels so decidedly old school because it's not quite as big as a deck of cards, but it's most of the way there, at least in terms of its, you know, X
it is very much
Y.
business card sized.
Yeah, it is a big chip. But it's pretty crazy. I mean, single thread performance, you know, it's fun looking at like the Cinebench numbers and the Audacity MP3 encode, where like the Core i5 7600 is the sweet spot in terms of, you know, the performance per dollar. And then as soon as you kick on down to the really unhinged kind of stuff, things shift a little bit, I feel.
Yeah, it really is kind of the tale of two sides on this part, right? So the flagship kind of Delta data point is highly multi-threaded, low latency dependent workloads like ray tracing and 3D rendering and video transcoding and a lot of that type of stuff where, you know, for $1,000, which is first of all, it's worth saying that's a ton of money for a processor regardless of who you are. But like the Core i9 7900X is a 10-core 20-thread for $999. The Threadripper 1950X is 16-core 32-thread for the same price. If you look at Cinebench multi-threaded scores, you're looking at 37% delta. It's like 30% on Pavre. It's like 27% on one of the Blender render workloads. It's like 11% on one of the other ones. So there are significant areas where AMD's processor wins by a sizable margin. And if you really look at AMD's strategy with Ryzen, and this, even though we always call it Threadripper, and it's technically AMD Ryzen Threadripper, it kind of fits in line with what they've done, right? They They've understood that their IPC is a huge uplift from what they've had before, but still not really going to match what the performance levels are of Intel's latest, Kaby Lake or even before that Skylake architecture parts. Yeah, you can see that in that single threaded graph right there. So how do they make an impact? How do they push a new product on the market that's going to have people excited and interested to purchase on it? Is you make do in other areas, right? So they on Ryzen 7 they did 8 cores and 16 threads that were competing against the price points of quad core parts. And here they're doing 16 threads versus 10 thread, or 16 cores versus 10 cores. So it's a significant advantage there. But keep in mind, even though you have 60% more cores, you're only getting up to 37% more performance in those multi-threaded workloads. So there is that trade-off there. In those single-threaded workloads, things are going to be a little bit slower. But when I say that, it's still like really fast, right? So keep in mind that this is still a modern, high-performance processor. It's not like you're kind of reverting back to Phenom days or anything like that, where you're worried about some of the capabilities and technologies of the architecture itself, right? So the way I kind of came away looking from performance, because one of the other areas we focused on in the story was gaming. And if you remember back to the Ryzen 7 and 5 releases, gaming performance was a headache for AMD, because a lot of people, including us, did performance testing at 1080p. And when you're talking about processors that range from $220 to $500, like somebody who's gaming on a 1080p display is a reasonable expectation, right? There's plenty of statistics out there that show you how dominant 1080p monitors are for PC gaming. When you get into that $1,000, that $800 processor, depending on if you go with the 1950X or the 1920X, I think the mindset of doing or putting a bunch of weight behind 1080p testing results for gaming is minimized, because in general, if you're the type
I would
of person,
go so far as to say it's silly. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of scenario that certainly some of the vendors and AMD are pushing is that, so you're a programmer, you're a video game developer, you're an artist, you're a video editor, and you want to be able to throw a metric ton of power at, say, Adobe Premiere and a rendering application, and something else simultaneously, or you want to be, running a giant code thing while you're running a giant database, search while you're doing something else in the background, like, going in and digging through and setting processor affinities, like, and, going into Task Manager and details and right-clicking and process affinity and being like, I'm going to dedicate these 5 processors to Premiere, or, these 6 processors to Handbrake, or whatever the maximum number of, I should say cores, not processors. But that's kind of the big thing is, okay, if you're video gaming and capturing in real time and rendering for an upload for your YouTube channel, if you are a, unhinged programmer, if you are an unhinged content creator working in video and want to be able to run multiple things simultaneously, that's a good target for this chip. If you're a typical Steam gamer, not to take anything away from a typical Steam gamer, because I'm a typical Steam gamer, like, it's like, okay, I'm going to play some Rocket League at 1080p. This is a particularly poor use of this processor, though. By all means, if you want to render video while uploading a file, while doing a 3D render and playing Rocket League at the same time, then this is your this is probably the processor for you. Yeah. For gaming purposes, I look at this processor in this way, right? If gaming is your primary use case for this, if this is what you plan on doing with it, Threadripper is not the right processor for you. But neither is Skylake X. Neither is $1,000 7900X CPU. It should be a 7700K. It should be a Ryzen 7 1700. It should be something much more affordable, much more in line with what the expectations are going to be. But if you are a developer, content creator that plays games as well, right, in your downtime, it's not like this is going to stall you out or anything. It's still going to provide plenty of performance, especially if you're running at higher resolutions where the impact of the CPU and the platform are much less dramatic than they would be at lower resolutions. So I think it's worth the criticism towards the product line for that.
But like, if you look at our 4K gaming results, they're pretty homogeneous across the board. So if that's something you're doing, and I imagine we'd see the same if you do 3440 by 1440, type of stuff as well. There was one interesting workaround, right? So one of the things we haven't talked about yet is with Theadripper, they introduced these memory modes. They call them local and distributed. The rest of the world calls them NUMA and UMA. And essentially, I don't know if you've ever worked with a 2-socket system before, but when you work in a 2-socket workstation and you just boot up Windows, you see these things called NUMA nodes in Task Manager, which are divisions. One processor has its own memory controller, and the other processor has its own memory controller, and the operating system tries to keep threads that are related on the same processor so they have quicker access to the memory they need. They don't have to cross between sockets, those types of things. The complication of that, Windows handles it just fine. The problem is some applications, like if you want one application to use all of the cores on a system, it has to be, quote, NUMA aware in that situation, meaning that it's able to manage memory in a way so it knows that, okay, I actually want to put these threads with this memory over here and these threads with this memory over there, and get it to work out that way. If you have an application that is not NUMA aware, it tends to be relegated to only using 1/2 of the CPU. Now with Theadripper, because of the split die design that they have, there's 2 physical die with a bunch of, with 8 cores on them each. They actually behave like a multi-socket system in various ways, right? Both in terms of the memory latency between them, how NUMA and UMA and local/distributed can be set up. And AMD is very upfront about this. They kind of provide you the options and flexibility to choose which mode you want to be in, and then are trying to educate people on what the advantages are for one or the other. When you put your system in local mode, NUMA mode, you are essentially hoping that the application and OS work together to, say you're playing a game, the game would be relegated to one of those die, one of those sets of memory controllers, and all those threads would kind of be in proximity to each other. It would improve gaming performance slightly because you'd have less latency across the interface, etc. If you put it in distributed mode, for applications like Premiere or Adobe Premiere is a perfect example for this, right? Where it doesn't have super high latency requirements, but it needs bandwidth and it wants all the threads that it can access. The distributed mode makes it all one NUMA node, essentially. There are no nodes. It's all accessible as one device, and the software doesn't have to worry about it, right? So it's interesting to see that difference come up. And then also, if you look at those 4K gaming results, you'll notice that Far Cry Primal is listed there, and it does not have Theadripper scores. It has a 7900X score, but it does not have a Theadripper score. And the reason is there are apparently at least 3 games that AMD found that if you have more than 20 threads on your system, the system just or the game just doesn't load. It just like errors out, right? Far Cry Primal, Dirt Rally, and I think Far Cry 4 is one of those games as well. So whatever engine that happens to be using, they just like, if it sees more than 20 threads, it just doesn't get past the splash screen. Same thing with Dirt Rally. So their workaround for that is in their software. They have a mode called Legacy Compatibility Mode, which essentially disables half the cores, runs it as an 8-core 16-thread processor, but you still have access to all the PCIe, all the memory channels, all that type of stuff. And thus you can play those games. Right, and actually, it's supposedly, again, you'll have less memory latency, so it might be a little bit faster as well. So it's not ideal because you have to switch back and forth, but it's not an AMD problem. To be fair, when Intel releases their 16, 18 core parts, they're going to have the same problems that would show up in Dirt Rally and Far Cry Primal and whatnot. AMD just happens to be first, so they're the ones that have to kind of deal with the fallout from some of that. But they're very upfront and they're very open about it, and they're kind of talking through the idea of, hey, like, we know this system isn't the best one for gaming, but here's how you can tweak it to make it its best for gaming. And so they deserve a lot of credit for being able to take it, like for working to take it that far, as opposed to just throwing up their hands and saying, well, this really isn't meant for gaming, so of course, right? I don't think the idea of switching between these modes is great, because you have to reboot every time you do it. So if you are a content creator and you're like, oh, I want to do something, I'm done with work now, I want a game, you have to reboot, you have to close all your applications, and what anything else you're doing has to go through that process. So little oddities here and there as we kind of broach into this world of enormous core count desktop consumer parts. But overall, I was really impressed with what they were able to do with Theadripper, that they were brought it to market. The systems were very stable. The motherboards we had no issues on. We've talked about these core-to-core latencies as well. They're a little bit higher. But it's worth noting again that, the motherboard we're using is a $500+ board, the ROG Zenith Extreme from Asus. It's a beast though. It's got 10 gigabit Ethernet and a whole bunch of stuff on there, but no stability issues, no memory compatibility issues. We had several BIOS updates sent to us over the course of the last week, and no issues updating them, and the software worked, and everything seemed to be very stable and reliable, which was not what we saw with the Ryzen 7 release, and honestly, not even really what we saw with the X299 and Skylake X release. So AMD deserves credit for that side as well. Clearly, their CPU team is kind of ramping up in those areas to accommodate for all of the extra attention they're getting that they didn't have, as recently as a year ago. So good stuff.
It's also worth saying that if they hadn't, for a $500 price in a motherboard, if they hadn't delivered a stable platform, people would be going berserk right about now. And rightfully so, because it's just a $500 motherboard combined with a $1,000 processor. It does seem interesting with the stability on this, because the Ryzen 1800, we just finally got one of the sort of what should have the clock speed, memory clock speed, sorted. The last upgrade we were waiting for on the BIOS. It's interesting, it's interesting to look, because that stuff's complicated and they're working across a ton of vendors, and it is not exactly simple coding to get everything to behave the way you want to do when you're tuning for performance, especially between the memory and the processor. So yeah, props to them, and hopefully they keep working at it for the slower systems too. We mentioned that the part was huge. You guys did an unboxing and a build video on PC-Per. Is anybody using air cooling on this, or is almost everybody doing liquid cooling? The Area 51 system was liquid cooled. A couple of the other ones I saw online that people put together were liquid cooled. Would you bother with air cooling this behemoth of a processor?
I don't know if I don't think I've seen anybody use air cooling on Theadripper yet either. I don't. Looking around, nobody's acknowledged. I haven't done it. So when AMD sent out review kits, they sent it out with a 360 millimeter cooler, right? They sent this with not just a self-contained water cooler, not a 120, not a 240, a 360 millimeter rad, which does a good job. It's a fine device. I think I've seen plenty of people testing it with 240 millimeter radiators. It's rated at 180 watt TDP. And when I did my overclocking testing, and I ran all 4 of the cores at 4 gigahertz at like 1.39 volts or something like that, the power consumption went up by like 140 watts or something like that. So,
whoa,
that's a lot. Yeah, exactly. So it wouldn't surprise me if we're approaching like a 300 watt cooling capacity requirement for this processor. I don't know exactly what the giant Noctua air cooler's cooling capacity is, but probably not that. And we did see somebody announce a self-contained water cooler specifically for Theadripper with a new water block that does a full coverage of the heat spreader as opposed to just partial coverage from all the ones that are shipping today.
Right.
And it was rated at 500 watts on the cooler. So clearly people are preparing for that. It's a power hungry CPU. It is a hot CPU, but the Skylake X part was as well, right? It was power hungry.
Right.
It's within 20 or 30 watts of what the Theadripper does. I'll be very curious to see what Intel's future parts offer in terms of performance per watt as they get above 10 cores. So I wouldn't plan on using an air cooler with this. There's a reason AMD shipped a water cooling bracket adapter in the box, in the retail box with the CPU. So
right.
I think that should put in place what everybody's expectations are.
180 watt stock, 320 watts overclocked. That's just suddenly my Core i7 920 seems like such a mild power consumer.
Yeah, it was interesting. Ken mentioned yesterday, I was like, okay, our system draw power during our CPU testing there was like 410 watts. Now that's for the whole motherboard, memory, system, platform, idle GPU power, all that stuff. But you couple that with, and like maybe you buy an RX Vega liquid cooled that's going to run it. If you overclock it, it's going to be at like 450 watts. So now you're looking at like almost 900 watts of power from an overclocked CPU and an overclocked GPU if you're running them at the same time. So we often talk about on the show that like, nobody needs 1,000-watt power supplies anymore and this and that. And maybe there's a little bit more. Yeah, there's a little bit more to that. Yeah, it'll be interesting. So,
well, it's also been
I would
so
stay away
long.
from air coolers.
We've watched, Intel drive power consumption down lower and lower and lower and lower and lower on the desktop, and then to have this beast come out, it's kind of like it's just a very different direction, So apparently you can have 16 cores. You can have an inexpensive processor, a 16-core processor, or a cool running processor, but you can't have, the three-legged stool.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, Intel has developed its process technology to focus on those 15-watt parts, right? They were very focused on getting their process tech down. And the result of that is when they crank up the frequencies and they crank up the power draw, it becomes less efficient than it could be. So, AMD doesn't have a lot of that flexibility. They don't have their own fabs anymore. They're working with other partners. Obviously, global foundries they work with to fine-tune these processes to help with their products, but they don't have as much capability as Intel does, today for fixing that type of stuff.
There are worse things. 8th gen Intel launch is coming August 21st. The Eclipse. So I'll be in Oregon. Pre-briefing, there's NDA pre-briefings, of course, but next generation Intel processors will be announced on August 21st. Not much to say about that until the week of the 21st. At least not
the picture there is a laptop computer, so they're clearly announcing parts for notebooks. No indication in the release here of
every parts launch in the last several years.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So I will say this: Skylake launched on the desktop first in like October of that year, and then it came out at CES in like the notebook form. But that's clearly a notebook in that image. I'm trying to figure out what else they even say in it. They talk about systems available for the holiday season. So there's that. I think there is a ton of confusion around what an 8th generation processor even is. Is it Coffee Lake? Is it a new revision of Kaby Lake? Everybody has their own kind of view on this. And I think it's possible that we actually see it as both. Which would be even more disconcerting, I think, for the consumers and system vendors out there. But we'll know more on, let's see, that's 11 days from now. Hopefully it's not during the actual thing, right? Like it's not actually during the eclipse, 8 a.m. Pacific. That's not during the eclipse, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's about 2.5 hours before.
An interesting marketing idea, but when they messaged me about it, I was like, no, I'm going to not do that. Like, I'm not going to watch that. Like, I'm going to be gone. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. So,
a lot of people that are into technology, also into science, and a once in a lifetime experience involving the moon blocking the sun.
It is also a once in a lifetime experience for a marketing team to be able to tie itself to a solar eclipse event of that nature. I don't know what that's worth. But hey, take a shot.
People get excited.
Now if they wanted to bring out media to like the highest point in the United States and like host an event during the eclipse, so everybody had this like first once in a lifetime view of it or something like that, that would have taken a lot more foresight on their part and planning in advance. So, oh well, I'll watch it in Kentucky.
Samsung announced their QLC V-Nand 16 terabyte NGSFF SSD, which is a new form factor, ZSSD V2. Samsung obviously being kind of big in the world flash memory storage. I think my favorite slide in the early part of it was the world's first 1 terabyte V-Nand, the world's largest capacity SSD with vSure Plus technology, 2.5 inch, 128 terabyte QL SSD. These are getting dense. 32 of these new V5 dies per package, and do so in a large enough 2.5 inch housing. The maximum capacity of such a device is a whopping 128 terabytes. Not 1 terabyte, 128 terabytes. That's dense. They basically have they've reclaimed NGFF, which is what M2 SSD started life as. Quote, Samsung's pushing a slightly larger NGFF form factor that supports higher capacity per device. Samsung claimed a PM983 NGSFF SSD will hold 16 terabytes, a 1U chassis full of the same 576 terabytes, and a 2U chassis, pushing that figure to 1.15 petabytes. So, I'm down with that. They're also basically pushing away for Flash to be accessed more directly by the application layer running on servers to make server performance more fabulous. And as much as I enjoyed the slides of V-Nand and the vSure Plus technology, I think the style award has to go to Intel's EDSFF ruler form SSD. So basically, it looks like a ruler. It's packed full of flash memory. And we're talking about 1 petabyte in a 1U chassis, which is really dense. Not 1 petabyte in one of those rulers, but you would have like a whole bunch of rulers inside of a 1U chassis. So that's pretty awesome. If you keep scrolling all the way down, keep scrolling, there it is. You can see either that slide or the slide right above it. You basically see a 1U rack just stuffed full of these.
One petabyte of SSDs in 1U.
Yep. Count them if you're bored. So Alan's going to be posting more details on the P4500 and P4600 later this week up on PC Per. But right now you're looking at a 32 terabyte ruler in 2018 using Intel's 3D NAND technology. So
any chance it's 10 cents per gigabyte? Any chance?
Only if you're buying it in really big volumes, I suspect.
I doubt even then. I don't think so even then, but worth a shot.
Oh my goodness. We can argue the utility of Consumer Reports ratings on certain corners of technology. I know some of the folks that work at Consumer Reports that write about laptops and desktops, and they came out of the lab pool, the lab testing group at PC Magazine, and they are as good as it gets in terms of physical testing. But what's interesting is they have pulled their recommendation of the Microsoft Surface laptops and tablets, or to just quote the article up on consumerreports.org, Microsoft Surface tablets and laptops, now I'm saying it backwards, not recommended by Consumer Reports. And their reason for that was, they do, I think they got 90,000 responses to their survey with people talking about the reliability of their mobile devices or their laptops, their tablets. Estimated 2-year breakage rates of 25%, as we know from our friends over at iFixit. Yes, iFixit has been an advertiser. Like a Surface tablet is one of the least friendly things to work on you can find. It's not the least friendliest because in many cases you can actually, if you can get the screen off, unglue the screen without breaking it, you can get down and say do an SSD upgrade or something. But these are non-trivial devices to repair. And basically, they survey their subscribers, and at least within the Consumer Reports subscriber base, 25% of Microsoft laptops and tablets will present their owners with problems by the end of the second year of ownership. So, and this applies to basically all of it. Detachable keyboards, such as the Surface Pro, the Surface laptops with the clamshell designs. So this is, Microsoft's estimated breakage rate, I'm going to quote Consumer Reports, Microsoft's estimated breakage rate for its laptops and tablets was higher than most other brands. The differences were statistically significant, which is why Microsoft doesn't meet CR standards for recommended products. The surveys are conducted annually. Microsoft's response was that Microsoft's real-world return and support rates for past models differ significantly from Consumer Reports' breakage predictability. Microsoft said in an emailed statement, "We don't believe these findings accurately reflect Surface owners' true experiences or capture the performance and reliability improvements made with every Surface generation." So, I got a Surface behind me that hasn't been a problem. Darren just bought his second Surface. He hasn't had a problem with his one, and he's pulled that in, I think, 9 countries and 3 continents in the last 3 months. So, it's an interesting question. And it's not 90,000 users, 90,741 tablets and laptops that subscribers bought new between 2014 and the beginning of 2017. So,
gotcha.
It's an interesting question,
Yeah, what is it? So they removed the Surface Book. When's the last time they've even updated the Surface Book? Has it been 2 years since they've done that? I mean,
it feels like it's closing in on that.
I question the usefulness of a recommendation of a 2-year-old laptop, I guess, is what I would get at, right? The fact that they pulled it is because Microsoft's claim is they're talking about older products and our newer ones are way better, right. and these reports, kind of do a blanket recommendation as opposed to on a per generation, right?
Right. Well, on one hand, I totally get where you're coming from. On the other hand, I think we've all had phases where we stopped buying products from certain companies because their quality seems to have waned.
Gotcha.
There's, what I mean? Like at one point I just stopped buying, Sony consumer electronics because they seem to have this like the warranty plus 5 or 6 days, and then they would disintegrate on me. Haven't had that problem in years, but I also gave up. Me and a couple of my friends gave up buying Sony products for a few years.
Right.
There's been times where people have had sort of blanket issues, and it's also, I would also be curious to dig down into the survey results, because if they're recommending a lower end Surface and that creates more issues with Windows 10, does that negatively reflect on the laptop? And is that the laptop's fault or Microsoft's fault? Which Microsoft, right, of course, being the manufacturer of the laptop, kind of smushes together at this point.
Yes, agreed.
It's
that's fair.
But 25%. When you take a look at their estimated breakage rate by the end of the second year of ownership, Apple 10%, Samsung 16%, Acer 18%, HP 20%, Asus 20%, Lenovo 21%, Dell 22%, Toshiba 24%, and Microsoft 25%. So they're not that far behind. For example, I've had close to 0 issues with the last 2 Dell XPS 13s I've carried, but those are also premium laptops, and perhaps were built a little bit better than some of the more broad consumer-friendly model lines. It's an interesting question. So it's an interesting question.
Interesting. Yep.
I thought it was worth talking about. T-Mobile dropped something. There were rumors about it a few months ago, but it's pretty interesting move by T-Mobile. The Revel, $125 for Android 7.0 Nougat. 5.5-inch screen, a 13-megapixel camera, 32 gigs of storage, a fingerprint sensor, a 5.5-inch screen, in case I didn't say that already. They don't really put the processor specs on the page on the T-Mobile website, but it's a MediaTek MT6738 processor, 2 gigabytes of RAM, which is actually pretty good, although it may sound slim compared to the 4 to 8 gigabytes of RAM we've been hearing from a lot of flagship phones lately. 3,000 milliamp hour battery, and that 5.5-inch screen is full HD or 1080p, so battery life should be pretty good. 32 gigs of storage, micro SD card slots. Launched today, $125. They must be
pretty good.
Pissed at Motorola.
I mean, that was, then they're saying, or it's $5 a month, right? That's the other purchase option. Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean,
3,000 milliamp hour battery. I don't know the specifics on what to expect on the performance or efficiency of that particular SoC?
Well, it's a quad-core processor.
Are there any other phones that we know of that use it? That would be kind of like a good indicator for me. But
yeah, it's an ARM A53 running 1.5 gigahertz quad-core, 64 bits. You know, it seems. I wonder if it actually integrates the camera too. Let me see if I can find that.
MediaTek on that. Yeah, so it's got a Cat6 LTE modem as a part of it as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Announced in December of last year, so still relatively new SoC in terms of how those things go. Yeah. I
mean, I think it's mostly something that normally shows up in budget phones in China. So
yeah,
T-Mobile basically went to Shenzhen, put together a list of specs, and came back with this. It's kind of crazy when you look at this. You're talking about these are used in phones in China. Where am I looking at? GizChina.com. With Chinese phones costing as little as $70 these days, MediaTek really needed to up their game and produce a decent processor that not only gives good value for money, but also LTE support. So, this is an inexpensive processor, for primarily dedicated to Chinese phones. And that's the lineup. They also have a 4X, basically a 6750, which has a pair of 4X Cortex A53, one running 1.5 or one running 1.0 gigahertz,
right?
And the MT6750. Yeah, and these
is there?
These are about a year
is this
old
the first time? Is this the first time a carrier has launched its own specific phone, not like partnered exclusive necessarily, right, but like this is the T-Mobile phone, and clearly they'll be doing heavy promotion of this inside their own stores. And there's definitely a different segment of consumers that want something like this versus want an iPhone, right, or a Galaxy S8 or something like that. But I imagine if my mom goes into a T-Mobile store and says I need a phone, this is the one that they're going to be pushing heavily.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. It's as far as I know, I can't think of an actual, certainly not since pre-flip phone days. I mean, this is pretty novel, and it's also part of their, it's funny because T-Mobile's also pushing their Jump on Demand program, which you pay the monthly fee and you can switch to a new phone up to 3 times a year. So as long as you trade in, basically as long as your current headset is eligible for trade-in, you don't have to pay any extra money. You can just keep swapping phone after phone after phone. Samsung Galaxy J3 Prime, LHK 20 Plus, LG Aristo, ZTE Z Max Pro. And I feel like this phone, I'd be really curious who built this phone, because this really seems like T-Mobile targeting the kind of ZTE price point, that very inexpensive and fairly stable and functioning phone. So I don't know. Really curious to see what the camera looks like, or I should say the images from the camera look like. In other news, while we're talking about bargains, Anker's built in a listless smart speaker, or an Alexa-enabled smart speaker. It's going to sell for $35, which is $15 less than I think the least expensive, Alexa device from Amazon.com. The $35 Eufy Genius smart speaker, and that's going to go on sale on August 16th. Yeah, it's a cheap Echo Dot.
But I mean, it's not like it's a completely validated product, right? Like they're licensing the Amazon AI technology, and they're just implementing it in their own device, like like they've announced they were going to do for smartphones and whatnot.
Given that for all intents and purposes, Anker doesn't sell anywhere other than Amazon, I would find it difficult to believe that they would, I mean, you can buy it directly from Anker.com, but, I believe the vast majority of Anker's sales are delivered via Amazon.com. So I don't think they'd piss them off intentionally.
Biting that hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
It's interesting. I think Echo Dots have been on sale for a while for $35, off and on. Prime Day were $35. I think they were on sale at Best Buy for $35 recently. Does V-Nand have anything in there? They're just talking about an announcement. They don't actually have a device. Wonder what the audio quality difference might be, or the microphone capabilities might be different.
Right.
Something worth comparing. Having both an Echo Dot and a standard Echo at the house, I mean, the sound quality is night and day difference, right? Like just the amount of space you get on for the speaker on the standard Echo outpaces the Dot by a significant margin. But $35, it's you're getting into that put one in every room price range that I'm sure is what Amazon is pushing for. Yeah.
Sorry, Amazon and Anker. Well, it's if you go to, and this is also part of a new product lineup from Anker called eufylife.com. Eufy is the product lineup. Eufylife.com is the website. They've got the Eufy Genie, they've got vacuums, they've got lighting, and a line of healthy devices. So I think it's interesting because, if you go to Anker's website, they have all of the stuff you've traditionally, known from Anker. They've got battery packs, chargers, cables. They've done some audio products here and there. So this is a big branding move. And they're not trying to do the Humos Air 1.0 ultrasonic coolness humidifier under the Anker brand, which, as far as I can tell, is not. Yeah, it is not a smart device, as near as I can tell. It's just a humidifier.
Nice.
They do, however, have a smart scale with Bluetooth.
There you go.
Just saying.
Finally.
No.
Again, I needed another one of those. Oh,
blood pressure monitor?
Not really.
So
sure.
It's a new brand for them, right? They've got a bunch of vacuum cleaners, a robotic vacuum cleaner, but I think the Eufy Genie is probably going to be the one that sells pretty well. Yep. From the holy cow, that's big department, kitguru.net has a great write-up of LaCie's new 96 terabyte, what they call the 12 big, which in this configuration was 96 terabytes connected via Thunderbolt 3. It's pretty crazy. This is for giant amounts of storage. It is for professionals with a fair amount of cache. It's really crazy, right? They have 12 drives inside of this. They measured speeds of 2,287 megabytes per second for RAID 0 and 2,231 megabytes per second for RAID 5. So there's obviously a staggering amount of processing power inside of this. And it sells in the UK for £8,300, which means if you can find one for sale in the US, it's going to be $10,700. You can buy.
That seems like a lot of dollars.
Well, you're talking about 96 terabytes of storage. That doesn't seem too crazy. And the version they tested had 12 8-terabyte Seagate Enterprise NAS drives installed. So, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. What are those costing? $400 a piece, I think. This is this is a fair amount of storage, and I think it's it just seems staggeringly fast. Yeah, these are
the pictures make it look like a rack mount server as opposed to any kind of actual storage device, but it's impressive.
Yeah. If the price includes the drives, you're talking about just over $4,400 worth of drives inside of this machine.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that's a lot of striping.
Yeah. So they did a real life file transfer test on one of their pages over Thunderbolt 3. They moved a 60 gigabyte ISO image, Steam folders, all that type of stuff. They were only getting like 540 megabytes per second or so, which is significantly lower than I would have expected them to get. So I don't really know what's up with that, if there was a limitation of what controller they were using on the host system or whatever. Because if you look at like Atto results, they are pushing that like 2.9 gigabytes per 2.8 gigabytes per second in over Thunderbolt 3. So interesting kind of variance in the performance results.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts. Yeah, they used a Asus Thunderbolt EX3 add-in card, so.
Yeah, I mean, that should be able to go significantly higher than 540 megabytes per second.
Maybe there was overhead.
Don't get me wrong, I'd like to see one of these on my desk. I think that would be neat. I don't really have a particular need for that much capacity. But you grow to the space you're given, right? That's what it is.
That's the spirit. I like that thought. Hey, one last thought before we go. Ryzen 3. We talked about Ryzen 3. We talked about Ryzen 3 on a tech thing too. Has no GPU. So if you are desirous of a multi-core GPU and you're not doing, Adobe Creative Cloud or gaming, and you do not wish to buy or not expecting to buy a new 3D GPU, you are still going to have to either recycle your old GPU or buy a new one, because if you just buy a motherboard and a Ryzen 3, you're not going to be able to use it until you buy a GPU or beg, borrow, or steal a GPU.
I'll take the blame for that, for not bringing that up when we talked about it, because we're just so used to people using discrete GPUs for everything. But in reality, when you get down into Core i3, Ryzen 3, a lot of times people are they're building dedicated, integrated graphics boxes for that. So none of the Ryzen parts have that yet. We'll have to wait for the APUs that will come out. I don't know if that's going to be, that's probably by the end of this year, I think, that we'll see the Ryzen and Vega based APUs that will come out, and we'll address that space accordingly. But it was worth noting for sure. So, think of Ryzen 3 more as your budget gaming build processor, and less so of your budget PC build processor, I guess, right? Because if you're not gaming and you're fine with integrated graphics, the upcharge for a even $99 CPU or $99 GPU changes the cost positioning of Ryzen pretty dramatically against Intel's Core i3 and i5 family.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, we start looking around for the cheapest possible PCI Express GPU. I think you can probably get under $50, but you're going to be digging.
Yeah, that's probably. Yes, you're digging hard to get down to that level. I want to say like the 560s start in like the $80 range or something like that, maybe as well. 540s, I think they go down there for the Radeon line.
You can still buy. You can still buy GPUs that have 256 gigabytes of memory on them. They're going to seem the same. GeForce 9800 GT is $56.
Right.
Oh man, it's hard to find one for much less than $50.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking on Newegg real quick. The RX 550 is $80. So yeah, that's pricier than a lot of people are going to want to pay if you're getting down into that $100 CPU range. So it's definitely a worth considering, right? So when you get into these other processes, and when you get into other GPUs, that something like you were just describing that had so little frame buffer, integrated graphics might actually be better at that point, right? It just depends on what your memory config happens to look like.
Hold on, let me see if I can. I'm trying to figure out if I can find the lowest price GPU I can buy on Newegg. Oh, here we go. Well, if you don't mind a refurbished board.
Sure.
You're going to laugh. PNY GeForce 8400 GS, 1 gigabyte DDR3 PCI Express video card, $16.99.
Wow.
Jumping into the non-refurbished realm, EVGA GeForce 210 DirectX 10.1, 512 P3 1310 LR, So it's a 512 megabyte card for $29.
Newegg does list the ATI Rage XL 8 megabyte PCI video card on their website for $1787. Ships from Asia. So there's that. I might actually buy that. Just to see what happens. You could still buy that. Yeah, I just was curious to see, Rage XLs. I might have one of those somewhere actually sitting around the office or the house. Now I'm interested. Now I don't need to browse through all this. This is a bad idea. Don't do this, Ryan.
Yeah,
I don't need any of these graphics cards.
Oh man. Oh, a GeForce 8400.
Yep.
Man.
Yeah, that's an okay one.
That was a while ago. It's $35. So let's say a minimum of $35 to complete your Ryzen 3 GPU.
Fair.
Sorry, some of these numbers I haven't seen in a really long time. I'm going to close that window, or else I'm going to follow you right down that rat hole.
Yep, that's a good idea.
Hole. Oh my goodness. Got Eero 2. We're going to be doing a review of that on Tech Thing next week.
Cool.
We posted our look at the Dell's 38-inch ultra-wide monitor, U3818DW, that went up on Tech Thing this week. We also talked about Broadpone, and Broadpone is the iOS and Android Wi-Fi flaw, or basically like if you have an iOS device 5.0 or newer and you haven't upgraded to 10.3.3, you really should. Technically, there is no, as far as we know, there's no Broadpone execution in the wild. But if you should stumble across Broadpone in the wild, it is basically going to run over Wi-Fi, not require. It's completely remote. It's acting as a worm. It infects itself and can execute code on your kernel. So you don't have to load anything, touch anything, poke anything, agree to anything. This isn't spear phishing. This is an actual flaw in the firmware for the chipset. So if you're on iOS 10.3.3, basically if you upgrade to the latest version of iOS for your device, you should be fine. On Android, we know for a fact that basically Google Pixel and a bunch of the Nexus devices are definitely on the list. But because it is so difficult to figure out which chipsets are used, we know it's like anything with a Broadcom, like 4.xxx. The problem is it's almost impossible to figure out which devices use those. We have a short list of them. We know for sure. We know there's some HTC devices on there. But keep an eye on updates being available for your Android device. If you can figure out, especially if you can figure out if it has a Broadcom 4000 series Wi-Fi chip on there. It's pretty nasty. Hopefully we won't see too much of it in the wild, but we'll keep an eye on it and see where that develops. But I wanted to mention that because it's a pretty crazy, it's the kind of infection that everybody thought was gone, where we just sort of danced from machine to machine. But then again, we've had all the craziness involving ransomware this year, so maybe it's not that crazy. Oh man, Vega coming next week. I presume 8th generation core Intel coming not too long after that. Are you ever going to stop benchmarking?
No. Well, hopefully one day. So Vega will be next week. It's actually on Monday of next week. So the reviews, hopefully we're almost done by the time I get off this podcast, I guess. We'll hope that's the case. So that's coming up soon. Air cooled, liquid cooled, maybe some surprise stuff in there, and those all go on sale on Monday. I'm told too. So I'll be interested to see how that lives up. After that, Intel's Skylake X parts will start to come out because they've announced the 12-core processors we're going to be selling by the end of August, and then by the end of October we'll have all of them, 14, 16, 18 as well.
No rest for the wicked, ladies and gentlemen. And by those standards, Ryan Shroud has been very, very wicked. PCPer.com is a place to find more of Ryan's work. You can find me at avxl.com or techthing.com. And of course, you can find This Week in Computer Hardware each and every week at twit.tv/TWiCH, where we've got all of our older episodes and information on how to subscribe to the show and links to more exciting stuff there. And of course, twit.tv is the host of all of the delightful Twit programming. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shroud.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.